Hello, everybody, and welcome to my presentation, A Trip to Scotland. This is by me, Samantha Stewart, and without further ado, let's get into it. First, I want to acknowledge the elephant in the room. No, Scotland is not a country. It is one of four nations that make up the United Kingdom. But due to Scotland's rich history and media landscape, I received permission to do Scotland for this project, and hey, I am a quarter Scot, so it seemed only right. Scotland has an incredibly lengthy history, and I could talk for 20 minutes on just the history, but here are the absolute highlights. In 1843, the Kingdom of Scotland was founded, even though it had been inhabited for hundreds of years prior. In the following years, overreach by England was pushing Scotland to be absorbed, and the Scots were not too happy about it. This sparked the Wars of Scottish Independence and their own attempt at a declaration of independence. However, this was, unsuccessful. It did not work out. And in 1707, it became a union with England, effectively solidifying its spot in the UK. It has always been a relatively separate entity from the rest of the UK, even looking back throughout history. Does the World Press Index tell the full story? No, it doesn't. Because it is strictly a member of the UK, there's no real nuances shown. Even when looking at the index, almost all of their critiques online were based off of England's media landscape and made no mention of Scotland. Scotland has much more similar views and methods of journalism to independent Ireland, which is a far higher ranking on the journalism index with 7 as opposed to the UK's 20th place. When we look at comparisons, we start to see some broader differences between these two. Scotland's population is only about 7% of the total UK population, with around 5.4 million people. Scotland also boasts a rather impressive education system, with over 50% of the population having a higher degree of some type. Education is also free for Scottish natives, unlike the rest of the UK, where tuition is around £10,000 a year. However, they are a less diverse group of people on average, because minorities choose to immigrate to more diverse, large urban areas in the United Kingdom, and Scotland is not really on that map. So why choose Scotland? It's a nation within a larger state that is actively working to build its own voice while walking the line with the institution above them. It's a look at non-sovereign nations and how they can use media to create a distinct identity, as well as other paths to help solidify them as their own peoples. Devolution was a major turning point in Scotland's history. It essentially gave nations within the UK much more power to self-govern, and Scotland took this and ran with it. It was a slow process that took place between 1997 and 1999, but this overall strengthened every aspect of the individual culture in Scotland. This is where we start seeing very different streams of media within Scotland, those that are Scot-based and owned by Scottish individuals, and those that are UK-based media that are almost all coming from England. Let's look at Scottish outlets and where the power lies. Print media remains very popular in Scotland. It is often seen as a way to support local. Popular media includes public radio, newspapers, radio, and growing online communities that are creating an independent voice for Scotland. The National has really picked up a larger following in recent years and openly calls for an independent Scotland. Scottish audiences tend to trust their media outlets far more than English audiences. Why is this? Scotland has far more publicly funded news media outlets that by law should be impartial. Now, the UK government gives them the funding for these broadcasters, but it's up to the Scottish Parliament how that media funding is used. Traditional media, like I said, is also more popular in Scotland and has steered them away from the more sensationalist 24-hour news cycle like we see here in the US. We can really get a good look at these parallel media streams by looking at very polarizing issues. First, we're going to take a look at how COVID was covered. The UK took a far more laid-back approach as a whole, with a vague and confusing messaging with things like the Stay Alert campaign. Honestly, what does stay alert even mean when it comes to COVID? Scotland immediately came out and said stay home, being much more direct and cautious with their messaging. This was a very clear branching point, and Scotland chose to distance itself and pave its own path during this time. Brexit is another pivotal movement where the media and cultural divide became very clear. Across the large UK, media outlets were celebrating their newfound independence from the EU, but the Scots were not happy. Their media emphasized that 62% of Scots wanted to stay in the EU, and that their voices were being ignored. All this connects back to the referendum independence movement that I'll touch on here in just a moment. So what is a referendum? It was the first time Scotland, in recent history at least, held a vote on whether or not to declare independence from the UK. The media bias became very, very clear in this time, with UK-backed outlets pushing for unity and discouraging Scotland from moving forward with any ideas of independence. Many Scots were upset that supposedly unbiased media was so clearly choosing sides. The referendum was unsuccessful, however, with 55% of Scots voting to stay and 45% voting to leave. However, this referendum was in 2014, before COVID and Brexit exacerbated frustrations between Scotland and the broader UK. So will there be another referendum or another exit vote? Long story short, maybe. After Brexit and COVID showed a deepening divide, Scots once again called for a referendum vote, but the UK Supreme Court stepped in. They effectively took that power away from Scotland, declaring that they would need to be granted permission from UK Parliament at Westminster to hold a referendum. Since then, Scotland has petitioned for referendums a handful of times, and they have been rejected. This only ignited more frustrations between the two. And overall, Scotland is stuck in a political gridlock right now, but that doesn't seem to stop them building their own sense of community and cultural identity. Scotland has made huge investments, especially within the past decade or so, in their soft power. They have worked to further distance themselves from the broader UK sentiment politically, but have also built up their own cultural environment for tourists. Film, music, and dance festivals are internationally recognized and bring in huge crowds. Scotland is also looking to bring increased visibility to their actors, and when their beautiful scenery is being used in movies and TV shows, as historically they have not been given credit. Did you know that the Hogwarts Express is actually a real train line in Scotland called the Jacobite Steam Train? While Scotland is not politically independent, they are working hard to make their political ideologies known and start building international relationships for that plausibility. They're presenting themselves as a very progressive nation when it comes to women's rights, LGBTQ rights, green energy, and environmental protection laws. Because they aren't politically independent, all visas are still issued through the UK. Interestingly, though, this has not stopped Scotland from building a strong groundwork for tourism and immigration for the future. Some smaller areas in Scotland, called council areas, are actually offering incentives to immigrate now. Let's go over the challenges that face Scotland now and the ones that are going to face them in the future. There's some very troubling political gridlock between Scotland and their superior UK government. Not only is there gridlock, but there's some contradictory rules between the original devolution of the 90s and the more hands-on approach that the UK government is now taking. There is no productive path forward as a union right now if that stalemate is not addressed. Because of these rising tensions, there has been reduced public funding for public media in Scotland, and larger corporations or government-funded organizations are attempting to buy out local independent journalists within Scotland. All these troubles have not stopped the Scots, though, from continuing to build their own national identity and paving a path forward. So what is my forecast for the future? I think that within our lifetime, Scotland will become an independent nation, and independence as a whole will bring a whole new bag of issues. They will lose all public funding from the UK and will need their own fully independent media. I think this will make them overall more reliant on larger corporations, and we may see a decrease in smaller publications. This will overall shift them towards a more 24-hour news cycle that we see here in the US, and I also believe that Scotland will try to cash in on some of that soft power that they've been building to amp up the number of people immigrating to the nation. There will need to be more people and more money to support their fully independent economy before they can make international deals. People often seem confused about how nations can be a part of the larger UK, but we honestly have a very similar system here in the US. Each state has their own rules and ways of governing, but at the end of the day, our federal government gets to make the final call. It's very similar in Scotland. Even though they have council areas that the Scottish Parliament is in control of, the UK courts could still step in and stop or veto the lower courts, so to speak, even if that lower court is the Scottish Parliament. We are very similar. They just have one more large government above them that has even more power. This leads us to some very interesting parallel conversations that are taking place. It is my belief that Scotland is at the very least working towards independence, even though that may take some time. But I think they will get there eventually. We have also had independence talks here in California about seceding from the Union, and Texas has done similar things. Even now, talks of California, Oregon, and Washington forming Cascadia and then joining Canada have been happening. Will this happen here in the US? I doubt it. But it does make us look at what causes these independence conversations to start. It seems that independence conversations are sparked by many of the same problems no matter where they are taking place. Political disagreements, economic uncertainty, deeply differing values, and differing sense of community all play a role. To end our conversation, I wanted to do a quick comparison between Scotland and the US. In the US, each state has its own constitutionally enshrined protection and power. The idea of state secession isn't taken seriously because of this. Our broader media landscape is seemingly more progressed than capitalism, with more media being funded privately and owned by major corporations. Even within the past few weeks, Trump has attacked NPR and PBS, some of our last truly publicly funded and owned media. When looking at Scotland, they have very little protection from the UK government, and the idea of succession has turned into more of a when, not if, in recent years. Overall, though, we are very similar, with decentralized government with smaller areas self-governing, higher trust in our local media outlets, and very strong and unique local communities. All right, that is all I have. Thank you so much, guys, for watching, and I hope you learned something. Please tell me if you have any questions, as I'd love to chit chat about it.